Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. If there were ever a video that was tailor-made for what we're doing on this channel, it's this one. Jubilee recently came out with a video titled Black Conservatives versus White Liberals, an episode of Middle Ground. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Do white Americans have more advantages because they're white, or do just white Americans have advantages because of historic factors? I think that people want to argue at the end of the day over whether it's because you're white or not. I think that the answer is because you're white in the past, and that's how it kind of carries over to today. You know, even in times of the United States history where black people tried to build wealth, you know, with the Tulsa riots and everything, where, this wealth has been destroyed. And something that's upsetting to me is when conservatives talk about how we can't blame the past for what's happening in the present. That is true to some extent, but then the next breath they'll talk about how important it is to have dual parent households, how important it is to have a strong family, to have responsibility passed on from parent to child. And we've seen in the past that because of racial issues, that process has been severely disrupted.
The funny thing is that agreeing with all these things is when I did my research when I was younger, which arrived me to my standpoint of being a conservative, because I believed it was racist, Democrat, liberal ideologies and policies dating all the way back to the 1800s, all the way up to the 1960s, and then the purported big switch. But I think it was more so when Democrats decided to be a bit more cloak and dagger about their true opinions of black people and be more secretive and more, oh, we want to help you by, doing these things and seeing them as inferior.
Doing what things?
Affirmative action, welfare, all sorts of things that
welfare.
eventually ruin our culture and place us where we are now.
So
but I want to get back to the history of it, because we're talking about...
Well, I just want to make sure we're clear. Giving them money hurt them, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, giving them, because if your father's out of the home, that's when we give you the money. If you're living in this housing,
so then give them the money while the dad's
rent-free.
Well, then give them the money while the dad's in the home.
If you're working this amount of hours and getting less than this amount of dollars.
Off to a rousing start in this conversation. The point that Chandler is trying to make here is that the way that welfare is currently set up is disincentivizing dual-parent households, which is disproportionately having a negative impact on black communities. Alex's response is, well, why don't we just pay people when they're in a dual-parent household? And they're sort of just talking past each other, not really listening to each other's talking points. But I want to go back to something that Destiny said before, because he brought up this kind of contradiction, or he sees it as a contradiction among conservatives, where they say, well, we can't really blame people for things that happened in the past for what's currently going on in the present, but at the same time, we need to strengthen the family and have these dual-parent households. Destiny's perspective is that because of the things that have happened in the past regarding racial segregation, that dual-parent households really haven't had the time to fully form within black communities because they've been so disrupted. Now, I am familiar with some data that would actually contradict that assertion based on the reading I've done of someone like Thomas Sowell. Something Sowell often brings up is how between the period of the 1930s and the 1950s, the single motherhood rate within black communities was going down. Pause for a sec. When I went back and checked, it turns out I slightly misremembered this data. Between the 1930s and 50s, the single motherhood rate within non-white communities was pretty much staying the same. And you'll notice via this graph, the category actually shifted from non-white to black once we hit a certain time period. Ultimately, the point is families were staying together more then than they are now. Okay, back to the video. But after the Lyndon B. Johnson Great Society programs, that's when the single motherhood rate began to skyrocket within black communities. I know that's more of a conservative talking point. If anyone is in the audience on the left and you have a good counterexample or a counterpoint to refute that sort of argument, go ahead and share that in the comments. That's the information I'm working with. Something that I really want to emphasize on this channel is that all of us in our various talking points, whether we're on the right, whether we're on the left, whether we're trying to do our very best to aggregate both sides, are still working with limited information. From my perspective, it's very unfortunate when I see folks like Chandler and Alec arguing without really understanding the other's position, because inevitably, they both have important elements within the larger picture, but if they're not communicating those elements to each other and waiting for each other to finish their sentences and asking good follow-up questions and listening to the other person's follow-up questions, then that communication barrier isn't going to be bridged. So I don't know how the rest of this conversation evolves, but let's see what's going on.
You're throwing the baby.
Yes, it is
You're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I don't even know what that means in this scenario, because yes,
you're
okay, you want to talk about throwing babies out with the bathwater? Margaret
for
Sanger wanted to exterminate the black race because she thought they were weeds. So yeah, we can literally talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's what Margaret Sanger, that's what Democrat policies wanted to do to my people. So that's why I feel so strongly about it, because it is these policies that date back centuries that were built off of the death and poverty of my people.
Let's take a breath.
Sure.
So,
I'm breathing.
okay.
So a lot of babies aren't, but I am.
Okay. I don't know what that means.
Alec, you don't know what that means? I mean, you haven't heard the dead babies line from conservatives? It's like always, they manage to inject abortion into every single conversation.
When I say throw the baby out with the bathwater, you want to completely get rid of welfare, okay? Or at least I don't want to put that on you, you haven't said that, but the conservative apparatus does.
I appreciate that he did that. He recognized that he was making an assumption about Chandler's position, and he quickly corrected it, saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I would say that's good debating etiquette.
Clearly. So giving money to a group of people does not hurt them.
I mean,
It
sure,
can't.
you're talking about a lottery.
It
Just
literally
hey, take
can't.
money. But
Yes.
there's
Okay. I'm going to push back against that claim that Alec just made there, that giving money to people cannot hurt them. This is coming from someone who is an advocate for universal basic income. So I generally do like the idea of giving people money, but you have to do it strategically. And I think it's better if it's actually attached to something pro-social, or at least attached to a natural resource within the area itself. Sort of talking about multiple things here. But the Alaska Permanent Fund, this is really the program that I'm referencing, has been going on for decades within Alaska. This is a conservative state, and they've been giving money to people in the realm of $1,200 per year to something like $4,000 per year. I'm not exactly sure of the exact numbers, but it's obviously gone up over time due to inflation. A couple things I forgot to mention within the initial recording. Number one, the money itself is tied to the oil reserves within the region. Number two, this program has been wildly popular and successful within this conservative state. They did a study on this about a decade ago and found that poverty was reduced by up to 20% within the state of Alaska. There are other forms of universal basic income that have been pitched, like the negative income tax, for instance, which would specifically target people earning below a certain threshold of money, but wouldn't disincentivize work based on the way that it's structured. We can get into that at some point as well. I'll probably react to Milton Friedman, who's the person who is famous for peddling the idea. So that's me pitching universal basic income a bit. I'm going to get back to Alec's statement in a moment, the idea that giving money to people cannot hurt them. That is untrue. Okay, back to the video. It should also be mentioned that the Alaska Permanent Fund seems to be running out of money at this point, and it'll be completely clean by 2028 or something like that. So we could have a longer conversation about this whole topic, but I thought I should mention that. All of that being said, I am not someone who advocates against giving people money, and yet I can definitely see circumstances where giving people money can hurt them. Take the example of a cocaine addict. If you're subsidizing someone's cocaine use, is that helping them or is that hurting them? In the grand scheme of things, that pretty much is what a Wall Street trader is, someone subsidized for doing cocaine. From my perspective, money is a magnifier of one's current circumstance. If you're someone that's fairly balanced, you've got a good head on your shoulders, you care about helping your community, you have ambition, you want to start a business, giving money to that person is going to do a lot of good. If you have someone whose life is a total wreck and they're completely miserable and they're basically the embodiment of BoJack Horseman, that money isn't going to do as much good. And I think this is something that people both on the left and the right have to come to terms with, that regardless of the policy that we put in place, some people are going to be beneficially impacted, some people are going to be negatively impacted. There's really no way that we can avoid the trade-offs in the whole thing.
Take
Strings
money.
attached to that money.
Take all the
There
money.
are strings attached
Give
to
them
that money.
millions. Make them all millionaires. I don't care. Giving money to black people does not hurt them.
And that has
thinking
not
that-
happened, though. That has not happened.
What do you mean?
That has not happened.
It
hasn't been a
You're
reparations.
saying
It hasn't been this
so
or that.
what
It has
you're
been a
saying
welfare program,
welfare
Great
was
Societies
designed.
Act that
Welfare
was built
was
off of the idea of, hey, we get these families split up, we get these
so
people
then let
living
them
here.
keep the family together and keep all the money.
I mean,
There you go.
I guess
Boom,
so,
done.
but I guarantee you,
I guess
there's
so.
no way that
Why
will
would you
happen.
not advocate for that?
So in your
Okay, now that we've gotten through that hectic thing, you guys probably are wondering what my position is on this premise. White Americans have more advantages than black Americans. I'm going to answer this in a slightly indirect way, because something that's important to consider with a premise like this is that people who are listening in the audience, depending on your own political perspective, are going to have a very different interpretation of how I answer. That immediately needs to be stated. As a white dude, from a left-wing perspective, if I am to say white Americans don't have more advantages than black Americans, without even providing a justification for my position, you immediately think that I'm some sort of advocate for white supremacy or that I'm not recognizing historical systemic injustices that have taken place. On the flip side of the coin, if I were to say that there is some sort of white privilege, there are some conservatives in the audience, okay, maybe not exactly you as an audience member watching this, you're just some sort of liberal white male beta cuck who's guilty about his own identity. And yes, I've heard this position said before. I've heard this position said directly to me. In the comment section, for instance, someone in a previous video of mine said, imagine being a white liberal. And there's actually a lot to discuss on this topic because I don't think the concept of being a white liberal is particularly incentivized within the society. But what I really wanted to point out right at the beginning here is that even more important than my actual position is the fact that other people listening to my position are already making judgments about who I am before I've even started the justification process. Now, let me try to steelman both points here. My general position is, yes, there are more advantages for white Americans than black Americans, but that variable of race is a very minor variable in the context of other more important variables like class. The liberal perspective goes something like this. There are historical injustices that have been afflicted upon black Americans, and because of that legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, these inequalities have continued to exist today. There are redlining practices, there are racist hiring practices. People on the left might point to a study where an employer was faced with a black applicant and a white applicant of equal qualification, and the employer was more likely to choose the white applicant without knowing anything else. It was actually a white name versus a black name, just for specificity's sake. So there are these judgments that we make on a daily basis, and it's based upon the cultural majority that's inflicting their own bias on the cultural minority. And if you want to take it a step further, maybe we can talk about the logocentric metaphysical prioritization of presence over absence, of illumination over what has yet to be revealed. White privilege, it isn't about skin color per se as much as it is about a symbolic categorization of whiteness and lightness is something to strive toward in the Judeo-Christian tradition, something to orient ourselves upward toward the light that is manifested in these biased categorizations on the basis of skin pigmentation. That might be a well fleshed out perspective from those on the left. Now, what would people on the right say? Well, they would say, if white Americans truly had more advantages than black Americans, and if white supremacy and white privilege is truly this pervading force within American society, then why is it that the highest income earners in this society are Asians? Why is it that the people with the best SAT scores for college admissions are Asians? They're the ones that affirmative action has most severely punished. These are Asians, by the way, where only a few generations ago, we were locking up the Japanese, dispossessing them of their property, and sticking them in internment camps. So if systemic discrimination really has this pervasive effect throughout time, then how have Asians so magnificently recovered from the conditions that we put them through? Surely there is another variable at play, or another set of variables that can be better explained by cultural differences. There's a reason why the vast majority of NBA players and NFL players are black, and the vast majority of winners of the Boston Marathon, for instance, it's like Kenya, Ethiopia, Kenya, all the way down the line. The argument from the conservative perspective would be that because African cultures have prioritized athletic performance more so, that has led to a greater performance within those domains, whereas different cultures prioritize other domains, and that's led to success within those domains. We can point out, for example, Jewish Nobel Prizes within the 20th century. There are far more Jews who win Nobel Prizes today than other cultural groups. Why? Maybe the Jews put greater emphasis on education. Maybe that's why when you look at IQ across the board, Ashkenazi Jewish IQ is 115, where that's a full standard deviation above the mean white person. So look, you have to take all of these factors into consideration. And even when I'm outlining both sides' perspectives, I'm still operating by limited information. That's what we have to understand here. There's really nothing we can do to break free of these biases than to simply listen to each other when someone puts forth a position.
I guess research of like history of this country and everything, do you find like the Reconstruction era and like the failures of like what it wanted to be and then what it ended up being, and then which led into had downstream effects to enter into the Jim Crow era, and you have policies like redlining that influence how schools are funded. The downstream effects of slavery, do you think put black people as generally in a worse off position than white Americans?
I think generation by generation, the effects of slavery have been diluted, but generation by generation, the effects of racism, welfare-based policies, and things of that nature became even more great. So in the 1880s or so, when we had our first black members of Congress, which were indeed Republicans, I think that was a great start for things, but obviously we had terrible...
I'm going to say this, it bothers me when conservatives make this argument where they talk about the Republican Party from prior eras as being synonymous with the Republican Party today. There was a political realignment that happened. There was a reason why Lyndon Johnson, with the passing of the Civil Rights Act, said, "We've lost the South for generations." Southern states were formerly Democrat, but that shifted, and the shift wasn't representative of one party being right all along. Keep in mind, there was also much more crossover between the parties. We become increasingly polarized today. That is all to say, making these comparisons from different eras of the Republican Party and trying to tie it to ideology, and that the Republicans have always been in favor of preventing discrimination and slavery. If you want to think about it in terms of who would have been conservative, let's say in 1840, well, the people who were conservative would be preserving the status quo. They would have been preserving the institution of slavery. That's what it means to conserve. So conservatives who try to paint the Republican Party as if they've always been against slavery, I think that's incredibly disingenuous. If you're looking to conserve things, you have to recognize that what that means is that even if there are certain injustices going on in your current time where history will not remember your position kindly, that you are still trying to conserve the good things, and that you have to take the good with the bad in terms of what you're conserving. Okay.
Things that happened, like the Tulsa massacre, among black people being chased out of their homes by the KKK.
Sure.
All funded by the Democrat Party, all supported by the Democrat Party.
Well, I mean, I need to stop you there. Can you attribute not to the party but to the ideology? Because I think when you think, regardless of whatever the party switch was, traditionally conservative values did not that's more aligned with more racist policies in this country.
It's very difficult to compare 2020's conservatism to 1880's conservatism. Oh, I was loving the 1v4.
So personally, I feel like there's really only one thing that white people have a true advantage over black people with, and it's that white people are less likely to be forced into a box. It happens with black people onto other black people, but it especially happens with white liberals onto black conservatives, where we are told that we are supposed to think a certain way, be a certain way, and if we're not, then we're called all these names like etc. And the worst of all is bootlicker, because I hate when a white liberal tells me as a black man that I'm a bootlicker, because then I ask, whose boot am I licking? Because you're telling me as a white person that me as a black person that I'm licking your boot because I don't think in this box that you want me to frame my mentality in. That to me is real racism, and that's what we need to stop allowing to happen to us, because black people are so quick now to not branch out and to have new ways of thinking, or to go into careers like agriculture and these other career paths that black people don't typically get into. It's not because of racism stopping them from getting in there. It's because we're told for so long that you have to follow this path and you have to think a certain way.
I think America is a great place for a black person. I think I'm an American. Anything that's available to you is available to me and mine.
I've personally never experienced white people having way more privileges than me. Like, I'm sure you could find certain institutions where black people are treated differently, but in general, I don't think that I've missed out on anything because of being black. And if anything, it's given me more of a voice because people will want to hear what I say now because I'm black. So if anything, I have more of a platform now just on the basis of being a black conservative and saying what's not popular than I would if.
I want to point out something that a lot of liberals would observe upon hearing her statement. We're going to do a little bit of hacking into the liberal mind here. For those who would discuss the importance of something like white privilege, an equally important component to that is light privilege. And so if you hold the position that lightness holds favorability in the society, you're going to some extent, listen to her talking about how she's never had experiences with white people being favored and say, well, yeah, you are a light-skinned black person, so you've actually benefited from the privileges of being light. In the context of a conversation, I think this is an incredibly ironic thing for liberals who are always talking about don't invalidate people's experience to use that as a way of invalidating their experience. That being said, I understand where the liberals with this perspective are coming from. I think it's pretty safe to say that lighter skinned people are going to have a set of different experiences than darker skinned people, and those differences can actually manifest within racial groups themselves. So, I don't know. It's complicated stuff. Let's continue.
Than I would if I was just a white person who was also conservative.
I agree with the Supreme Court's decision to end affirmative action.
I think I'm not going to start. Someone else can start. Sorry.
I think affirmative action has served its purpose. I think that it was necessary for a particular time. And I think that every Black person knows how to get into college. You can pull out the names, the Oprah, President Obama. You can pull out the head of Time Warner was Black man, the Forbes was Black man. We know what to do now. We don't need affirmative action anymore. And to me, affirmative action is offensive sometimes, especially nowadays, because I have 6 children and 2 boys, 4 girls. And all of them went to Harvard and Columbia and this one and that one. And it breaks my heart to think that they accomplished that goal of getting into these institutions just because of the color of their skin.
I can definitely say that it creates a lot of
tension. To her point that she made there,
I remember my first
about
week at the University of Illinois,
affirmative action being necessary at a certain time.
White student
that is the argument that is often made by those on the left who are in favor of affirmative action. Now, the tendency is to just sort of push that time of expiration down the line. Well, we won't need it at a certain point, but we still need it now, and then we won't need it at a certain point, we still need it now. It's very difficult to shift that way of thinking as to at what point have we fully corrected for the injustices of the past. Look, there's so many variables at play here, besides discriminatory treatment of different groups of people, that if you're merely looking at the group outcomes, you're going to justify present discrimination in response to past discrimination.
Asian.
A lot of tension when you have affirmative action. I remember my first week at the University of Illinois, I was sitting with some classmates and a white student turned to me and jokingly like, hey Xavier, like, did you just attach a smiley face when you applied for this college? And I started asking what he meant, and he said to me that he was like, you're Black, I'm assuming you had decent grades, you could have just attached a smiley face and you would have gotten
look
into
at Renee's
university.
Face.
So I was livid by that, and
holy
I went off
fucking
and started
shit.
naming all my accomplishments.
That's a
and
face
I felt so
of
confident.
That's a face of being stunned. Let's do the instant replay here.
Face when you applied for this college, and I started asking
the instant
what he meant,
replay.
and he said to me,
and I mean, that's really the cost of these kinds of policies. In our best attempts to assist people sometimes, we're merely perpetuating a different kind of problem. Did I really earn my way into this university? Did I earn anything that I've done? And this can especially take place within, let's say you're an upper middle class Black person or an upper class Black person. Let's say you're Malia Obama, daughter of the former president of the United States, and you're applying to Harvard, which, by the way, she got in. Are you able to confidently tell yourself, like, oh yeah, it was because of my own efforts and academic brilliance that I got into this university, not because of the status of my father being president of the United States or the fact that I am a Black woman? How do you tell yourself that, right? Is that going to have a cost on your own self-esteem as an individual? Probably. Putting the proper incentives in place to promote the best possible society is very, very, very challenging. You're not going to do it by attacking a single variable. And this is my problem with a lot of the research that's being conducted at universities right now, that so much of the focus in sociology departments, in psychology departments, is confronting these kinds of racial inequities solely on the basis of race. They've only attributed one variable to the problems. And that's just not how you understand a problem holistically.
This for me.
And too, I've seen it in the sense of like affirmative action taking away from other people who are minorities. Like I had a friend who was Asian and he in high school and he really wanted to go to MIT. That was his dream school. He interned there. He was super like prepared to go there and he didn't get in. And you can only assume that it was because of affirmative action because they have such a large Asian population that they want to admit other people.
Yeah, I was going to actually argue that it's more racist nowadays because it excludes so many Asian Americans from getting into universities who do deserve a spot and they can't get in because of affirmative action, which again, like you were saying, was necessary at the time. Yeah. But now it's like anybody, if you have the skills to do it and you're in America, you can get in.
I don't think affirmative action is the worst thing, considering all the different types or aspects of a background you might take into account when somebody's getting into college, whether they were in certain clubs, Boy Scouts, what type of classes they took, that might not be available to everybody. I don't think that factoring in the affirmative action is necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like because of everything you guys have said, the optics behind it are so horrible today that even if it is slightly beneficial in the long run for certain people, I think we can probably refocus most of that into figuring out like the class that people come from, the neighborhoods, the backgrounds or whatever, without it having to necessarily target race. The only thing that I kind of wonder now that it's gone is instead of a Black person being in school thinking like, man, am I here because I'm an affirmative action pick, is it going to be a kid that is poor or a kid that's from a different zip code?
I think we should do away.
And that's exactly right. And this woman's suggestion is just doing away with it altogether. And that's a fairly reasonable perspective. I think there's going to be this tendency as we develop our algorithms and have the ability to categorize people into all of these different scenarios of privilege, let's say, where, man, the allure of doing this will be too strong. We'll devise these new multifaceted, multivariable affirmative action policies that are based upon, as he's saying, zip code and life circumstance, and you can factor in whether the person has been beaten by their father or something like that. You can factor in religious upbringing, you can factor in type of religion, you can factor in this and that and this, and the algorithm will take in all of the existing research on these various subjects, and we will build a purely algorithmic society, which, as I imagine many people in the audience would see as quite dehumanizing. And to be honest, I think we are moving in this direction. I think algorithms are ultimately going to govern the world, and the way that we view human agency and free will right now is going to radically shift within the next 40 to 50 years. But I guess only time will tell.
With all of it, it's just like submit an application, no demographics. Why do they ask your sexuality? Like, why do they ask all that stuff?
So, if affirmative action accomplished its purpose, why do we still see the disparities that we do in the professional workplace? If you average white wealth and compare it to black wealth totals, white people as a whole have about 50 times greater wealth than black people as a whole.
Okay, another inaccurate statement. I'm glad that Jubilee had this message here to correct his statement. Although he might be using a mean wealth statistic, whereas the statistic being used here is a median statistic, and those numbers are going to be massively different because super wealthy people skew the distribution in quite a significant way. I'm glad Jubilee pointed out that inaccuracy.
Per capita. So I just don't understand why you think affirmative action has accomplished its purpose. I don't see
Curious.
that.
Why do you assume that just because there is a disparity means it's because of a racial issue?
What else would it be from?
I mean,
upbringing, economic abilities,
Desire to
skills.
go, desire to.
I mean,
So
zip
it
code
was their
does
fault.
play a lot. If you grow up in a neighborhood that experiences a lot of trauma, you're not as likely to do as well in school, which means you're.
Why did they grow up in a neighborhood that experiences a lot of trauma?
I mean, lots of people do.
Yes,
live in
but
a-
why specifically do more black people?
Government assistance programs.
Government assistance programs, like what?
Child redlining.
I mean, you can go into that if you'd like to, but let's take
It
a
is
look
relevant.
at the Great Societies Act, which was
Look, it's really hard to just pin these down to singular variables, and you can literally hear the liberal and conservative talking points emanating from these people's mouths in real time. I think one of the factors that rarely gets discussed is whether your family over time has been mobile. And dynamism is often a great indicator of economic development. That being said, let's say you have your family all living in one area. And you know that if you were to move to a different location, to a different region, to seek better economic opportunity, you would find that opportunity, but you'd have to leave your family behind. It's a difficult decision. That's a disincentive. Some people grow up in communities where their family's already situated in a prosperous region. And so they don't have to make that choice of, do I need to leave this rundown area in order to seek better outcome? That keeps a lot of people put in one circumstance. To say that that's been a contributing factor regarding these kinds of racial disparities would imply that mobility to different geographic regions has somehow impacted Black Americans more than other racial groups. Maybe you can point to the fact that Black Americans are earning less, and so they don't have as much geographic mobility. Yeah, you can make that argument. But once again, that's only one variable. And this is really the whole point I want to get across in this video. That we can have these conversations about what's the reason for this, what's the reason for that, and we can squabble back and forth. But we are all working with limited information. We have to accept that. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit here, and let's go to, Trump supports Black lives. No. Here's my perspective on Trump supports Black lives. I'm a liberal, so I suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, and anyone who understands this condition fully, if you're a conservative and you're concerned about my own struggle with TDS, please give me a prayer. In all seriousness, though, I think Donald Trump doesn't inherently not care about Black lives. He doesn't inherently care about Black lives. I think Donald Trump mostly cares about himself and maybe his family to some degree. but mostly himself. He's a narcissist. You know, when I watch back the interviews that he did when he was going on various media tours back in the 90s, speaking to the ladies of The View, kissing them on the cheek, you really get to see the inauthenticity of Hollywood and how people there, a lot of them don't really seem to have friends. Like, they claim that these people are their friends. They claim to know these people. Ladies on The View probably would have said, I knew Donald Trump as a man. It's like, no, you didn't. Like, you might have seen him on a television appearance a few times. You may have come across him. But clearly you didn't understand this person's moral character. Here's another thing about those interviews from the 90s. Trump is so much more composed and calm when he interacts with people. It's actually amazing. I think being thrust into this position of having all of these eyeballs on you, criticizing your every move, and attacking you on various aspects of your character puts so much pressure that you just become defensive at the end of the day. I think the narcissism was always there.
Love and hate him at the same time. I mean, I think he has, a monumental ego.
He comes off as being very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Arrogant?
Yeah, he's arrogant.
Even when you're watching the old interviews, you can sort of see this, it's this superficial charm that he puts on. He's very charismatic. I don't know, I had my psychological spidey senses tingling. Who knows? Once again, I'm a liberal suffering from TDS, so wish me well. I might get better someday. My political beliefs, reparations are necessary. Let's go to white liberals have a savior complex. Let's finish it up here. We're skipping a massive part of the conversation, but this video would be like 4 hours long.
White liberals have a savior complex.
If we did not skip.
Well, I gotta say, this is a shock. I never expected all 4 of you to just come forward and admit it, but you know what? I'm happy with these results.
I just think it's a lot of people, I guess, people, of the left, whatever, can kind of fall into that trap of thinking that, black people as a monolith need to be saved as a whole.
I have no shame about it. I have a savior complex as an older brother, and I will save you whether you like it or not. So that's just me.
Well, it's definitely not, because a lot of us are really just exhausted of being viewed as our skin color. Because when you have this mindset that you need to save black people and we're just sitting here minding our own business and living our lives the way we want to, I don't know why it is that people feel this immense pressure to be so apologetic and just always trying to cater and coddle to black people when we just want to be treated like everybody else. We're equal for a reason.
Yeah, that was a really strange thing for Alec to say, given the situation that he's in. I don't think he intended that to mean that he has a white savior complex for saving black people, but he was trying to make a joke about being an older brother. But that's ripe to be misinterpreted. I'm not going to be surprised if he's massively misinterpreted here in the next few moments.
I think especially recently with a lot of riot stuff that's gone on or protest stuff that's gone on, people on the left tend to infantilize a lot of different types of protesters, and especially even talking to, some of the other black content creators I do content with, when you hear a lot of progressives come out and say, well, they don't have a choice but to riot or break into this store, or, well, they're stealing, these electronics or shoes for good reasons, you just don't realize it. I think a lot of people kind of look both ways, and it's a little bit weird that there's such a complex on the left to excuse every single possible negative behavior from somebody, as long as they're a skin color that you're kind of in charge of protecting.
I find that very offensive.
Yeah.
I find it extremely, it upsets me to hear that, because we're just like you. We just have a different skin color, and to hear that you have to help me is offensive to me. I can do it on my own.
Well, we have to break down sometimes why these riots happen. MLK once said that riots are the voice of the unheard. So if you are to address the problem and stop the riots, you have to address the underlying inequality that has historically been pervasive. Even if you as individual people are doing fine and you don't want anybody else to get in the way of that, that's cool, and I'm not going to be the one to get in the way, but the disparities are undeniable.
So if you take pride in having a white savior complex, what is it that you think that you're doing to save black people, and what is it that you think that you're saving black people from?
I am trying to make the world a better place through whatever means
I don't know what Alec's positions are here, but notice how he initially said that as an older brother he has a savior complex, whether you like to be saved or not, which is a little bit of a sarcastic statement. And then he just had the position projected onto him of, if you have a white savior complex. If he's interested in getting back into a good position in this discussion, he needs to reframe that immediately. I never said that I have a white savior complex. I said that I have a savior complex as someone who wants to protect other people. And I think this idea of white liberals have a savior complex, it's being simplified to a discussion of race. I think the real savior complex comes in for people who have economic privilege versus people who don't. And to be honest, that's the whole premise of charity. Charity, as a concept, comes from a savior complex. We understand. We have more. We didn't earn that more. We just happen to have it. And we don't think that's entirely fair. And so we want to help correct that. I really think to have a savior complex from a position of economic privilege is completely natural. Then again, how you go about expressing that savior complex, what you're trying to do, it can easily get you into a lot of trouble. And we saw someone recently go down in one of the biggest financial frauds in United States history, in global history. And I'm talking about Sam Bankman-Fried, this dude who had this identity of being an effective altruist, and he wanted to make as much money as possible. And he said, I'm going to donate 99% of my wealth away when I'm about to die. What ends up happening is you build yourself up to be this great messianic figure that can solve everything and save anything. And then you possess a company that's worth over $30 billion. And you have all these big name people that are throwing their money behind you, and they seem to like you. And you branded yourself as this crazy super nerd genius, effective altruist. I'm going to be the revolutionary figure to bring crypto into the mainstream. Next thing you know, you're cutting corners behind the scenes in order to try to make that vision come true. A lie here or there. Yeah, I can lie. So yeah, no. We need to funnel a little bit of money there. Yeah, Alameda, FTX, not entirely separate. Doesn't need to be. We're building for the greater good. Next thing you know, you're committing massive fraud. That is the danger of a savior complex.
Through whatever means I can. And
but you're doing it on the backs of us.
I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, I actually do. I feel like you want to be a savior for, and you're using me to make yourself feel good. That's what I'm hearing.
How am I hurting you?
You're not letting me have my own voice. You're not letting me speak.
How? You're speaking now?
No,
You're cutting her off.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I have to.
Yeah. Well, what's happening? I mean, you're speaking right now. You're speaking right now in this particular setting.
Man, he's walked right into this one.
Like you took it back to riots and so forth, and it makes it seem like the only way that we as Black people can have a voice is by riots, and then you need to come along and you need to say, okay, poor little Black child, let me help you. That's offensive to me, and I feel like you're making yourself feel good about trying to help us.
I also think that, like, when we talk about damage, I think especially when it comes to a lot of the shoplifting stuff that's going on in certain cities, you get a lot of white people that live in nice suburbs saying things like shoplifting is no big deal, that's fine, and then you'll catch YouTube videos of them later on being in a Walgreens in like a shoddy neighborhood, and they're like, man, why is the deodorant behind a locked case? It's very easy to sit behind a gated community and say, oh, well, it's not a big deal, they steal because they have to. Riots are the language of the unheard. I think people haven't read the full context of that quote. When MLK was saying riots were the language of the unheard and you need to address the underlying condition, he wasn't condoning the rioting, he was just understanding it.
Obviously, there are a bunch of white people that feel they need to be a savior, but I think there's a difference between helping and saving. Like, I don't think I would need to save Black people, but I would tremendously love to help and make sure everyone has equal outcome, or not equal outcome, but at least equal opportunity.
It's funny how this language of equity just connives its way into your own personal vernacular. I'm glad that he made that correction from equal outcome to equal opportunity, but man, this stuff is so subconsciously ingrained in people now that you have these clear examples of Freudian slips. Maybe I'm reading too much into that too, which I could be.
In my opinion, I feel we do not have in this country.
This is awkward. Hi guys. So I didn't step forward just because I don't want to broad brush all white liberals as having a white savior complex. I have experienced white liberals who do have that, and they're very unpleasant people. But I don't think every single white person who's a liberal or who is an activist for BLM or any of those things necessarily has a white savior complex. I think that there's a lot of white people who genuinely think that Black people are oppressed and they want to help and that's what they're told.
What it seems like to me, when most people have savior complex, regardless of whom they're trying to save, it's like they're taking real pain and real trauma and using that as a way to push this political agenda, but also to alleviate themselves of whatever guilt that they feel unnecessarily. Like, I don't know why a white person today would feel guilty for things that happened decades ago, let alone something that happened centuries ago.
And that can absolutely be a motivation to absolve yourself of the guilt. The irony of it is, I mean, I've experienced this. I tried to leverage a very popular video to share my own initiative that I have, combining universal basic income, psychedelics, and therapy, which is a plan that needs a lot of unpacking, more than just 10 minutes of scripted analysis. And man, I was just pilloried for the things that I was saying. And people were saying pretty similar things to what Xavier's outlining here, that I'm not actually hearing the problems, and that I'm using this video to pursue my own political agenda. Everybody is using the YouTube algorithm, if you're making content on YouTube at least, to promote your own agenda. Whether that agenda has broader implications or whether you're just getting views from reacting to a video in a specific way, it can be both at the same time. It's challenging when you think you know something that can help, when you think you have the context required to propose a solution, and you're tired of people not proposing solutions. That's the other thing. We just like talking about problems. And so to actually position yourself as someone who's boldly offering solutions feels good. God damn it. I'm actually one of the people that has an idea on something. And I know it's not going to work for everyone. It's a pathetically limited idea. But maybe if I just share it, it will get some appreciation and recognition. But then you realize, like, I didn't meet these people where they were, and I just totally skipped all of these necessary steps in order to persuade the audience and reveal how this could be something that's helpful. Here's the other challenging thing. People naturally have an idea of what is going to help their own circumstance. And then there are others on the outside who think they have a better view because they're more removed from the situation. It's like the Machiavellian analogy that he offered at the beginning of The Prince, that he was standing high up on a mountain, and that's why he was able to provide better analysis with regards to rulers. There's naturally going to be a disconnect between the people who are actually experiencing the problem, what they think they need, and what people on the outside think the people who are experiencing the problem need. My speculation is that neither side is correct. The only way to actually forge the solution is to somehow bridge the connection. There has to be a bridge between the people who think they know better for other people and the people themselves with the problem. Each is going to offer a valuable perspective, but not the complete perspective. And that to me is really the issue. How do you solve that? Just needs to be listening on both sides. That's the only way it can get done.
Never seen a white person say, I personally feel guilty for slavery. Maybe they're out there, but I've never heard that.
Yeah, in second grade, when they taught us about slavery, almost every kid in my classroom would spend their entire time looking at black kids in that classroom. How was I supposed to not think, wow, these people are feeling guilty for something that they have no involvement in and I have no involvement in?
Every kid in my classroom understood the context.
People hate feeling uncomfortable, and obviously you don't want to feel like the bad guy, and so I feel like it comes from a place of like, oh, well, like, let me make sure that I'm different, and like, I'm showing you that I want to like help you, but it comes across like, I think it can land very poorly.
I'll tell you what,
so bad.
Stop it. Stop it. Because what happens is when you put yourself as the white savior, what you do is you elevate yourself above the black person because you feel then like you have to save us. So just stop it. Just treat everybody regular and normal. Just like I would treat you regular and normal, you treat us regular and normal rather than trying to save us.
I just got one thing I wanted to bring up earlier about taxes, because you were saying that you had your job and you were talking about how like you get the tax every time and you're like seeing your tax go up. I worked in nursing homes in 2020 COVID. The last thing that was on my mind when I watched 60 and 70-year-olds on their deathbeds suffocating to death was taxes. I was worried about healthcare. I didn't give a shit about taxes in that time. So when I go to work every day, that's what I see. That's what I want to fix.
I see you once again elevating yourself above the rest of us, and particularly at me, a white man elevating himself above a black person.
He
called me a bootlicker.
Sorry.
He called me a bootlicker.
Oh no, I triggered them all. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm chilling, buddy.
So what I
you are.
hope comes out of
I'm
this
chilling.
conversation is that we're all Americans, and because we're all Americans,
Oh, man.
actually we
They
know
do
that
not
America
like
has
him.
a bunch of problems, and I
Holy
think every
smokes.
person here wants to solve the problems, and I think everybody is bringing what they have to the table with their ideas on how to get us to unify. This kind of stuff, right? But you got something in there. Hopefully, I mean, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you have something in there that's redeeming about you that would bring all of Americans together. So I hope that we end on the note of American.
UNITY.
I would like to say we're all made in the image of God.
Yeah, he was perhaps using that to elevate himself, but Renee, you were also using that statement to elevate yourself above him. This is just the nature of conversational power dynamics. That can be a lot of human interaction, unfortunately. Quite tragically, elevating themselves above other people. Listen to some Pink Floyd. They'll tell you how it is. On that note, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this analysis. See you next time.